Я приветствую вас, дорогие друзья, уважаемые гости.
Hello, dear friends and guests, subscribers of my channel and the channel of Alexey Arestovich. Hello, everybody. We are doing a live stream on both channels, and we're talking about most important matters, about things that you need to understand what is actually happening in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And the face is really hot, both on the front and in the public life in Ukraine. Alexey, good evening. Good evening, friends. All right, a couple housekeeping articles. Our communication is rather expansive. You can notice a couple QR codes on the screen. My QR code on the left leads you to my channel where you can leave a question for our next stream. And feel free to chime in, ask what is of interest. We obviously cannot put all of those hundreds of questions, but we'll try to aggregate them and to present them, at least the most interesting and most controversial ones. And in the tail end of the show, we will get to these questions. Of course, you can also ask your questions in the chat of this live stream, and we will take some questions from the chat at the end of the show. So regardless of all the limitations and censorship that different countries put on these streams, all these efforts that are aimed at destroying live word, we are glad that you still find ways to get connected, to get online, and to listen to the message. Let's start with this. Alexey, with pleasure, we are starting with a poll. And our usual poll today sounds as follows. If escalation actions of Zelensky are part of a plan, what that plan could be, and ways to answer. Number one, bring in Europe into the war with Russia. Second, lose loudly, get all the debts signed off. Option three, stay on the throne longer than Putin or Trump. And the final option is to destroy as many Slavic peoples as possible. So let's start with this. And we do have a ton of questions and news coming in. So if we can think that Zelensky might have a big plan, what plan could that be, Alexey, in your mind? Alexander, this is a trifold situation. First, a very cursory tells you that he has no plan. The planning horizon there is very shallow. It doesn't go beyond a couple months out. They act on the basis of let's live another night, let's live another week, and that's good enough for us. And we'll see and reconcile everything tomorrow. That's one story. Second layer deeper is there's no plan, but there are no expectations either. Expectations come where from? That Trump may somehow wake up and hit Moscow, or Europe may wake up and go in a crusade over Russia, and Zelensky will be somebody on the white horse leading that. Or perhaps Putin will die, or some aliens will come, or whatever. So a bunch of expectations live on the second level, a bit below the surface. Where do they come from? They come from certain expectations from this or about this anti-regime. Why people are asking me, am I calling it anti-project? This is from the books of Gumilyov. There are passionary systems and there are also anti-system systems, which have a lot of death energy and they basically want to die. Zelensky regime, Ukrainian current regime, is a typical example of the anti-system. Very simple marker for that system to be recognized is rapid dwindling of your population, because that system devours its own people. And in my estimation, it is proper to call Ukraine a religious sect, pretending to be an independent state. Oh, that's interesting, Alexey. Well, Alexander, there is nothing of the government in Ukraine. There is a lot of anti-government action, actually. And Zelensky's regime is a culmination of that approach. And it's also being trumpeted as the national idea. All the features of that anti-project are actually embodied in Zelensky himself. And religious sect has a very narrow worldview. It has a very narrow dictionary and very specific dictionary. And if you're not using these words, if you're not using this worldview, then you're against them. And you need to be oppressed. You need to be removed. Yesterday we observed more sanctions on Igor Moiseichuk, on Shaposhnikov, and the like. Because we, as those who are sanctioned, we are observing this process with curiosity because Petro Poroshenko, ex-president of Ukraine, he requested Supreme Court of Ukraine to provide reasons for sanctions against him imposed by Zelensky. And I'm quite sure they will fail to produce anything. And some people are saying that Shelest and Arestovich were talking too much, so that's why they were censored. Well, Poroshenko was talking diametrally opposite things to what we're talking about. And that just highlights for our listeners that the topic, the matter, is not the reason for censorship. And of course, they will not give any proof, but they will probably try to prevent Poroshenko and myself to get into power. We are heretics for them. They are the sect. They are Zelensky's witnesses. And we are heretics to them. And we have been disenfranchised from their organization and written into the blacklist, because not a single voice should be spoken aloud against the orthodox message with Zelensky at the helm and St. Johnson and St. Baden by his side. And by the way, people have not perhaps noticed, but Trump has recently removed limitations on US American arms that Biden had limited before. But returning back to our topic, Zelensky's regime is illogical. It operates in the religious realm with right believers and with heretics who oppose them. This is how they see the world. The fact that they have 25 to 35% of Ukrainians supporting them, it's sad. They are being suppressed by propaganda machine. They are being suppressed by Russian attacks and very upset by the ongoing war and devastated, so they just fall in with the party line. But if you want to understand at its core what Zelensky's regime means, treat it as a sect. Many things will become much clearer for you.
It has nothing to do with the government and government politics. The government would have stopped already, considering the perspectives of this war. It would have taken stock, minimized losses, and changed its politics in a fashion to remain. And the core of government interests would have been protected, while sect leads to death of independent Ukraine. This is the main consequence of the sect's existence. I hope everybody understands that Russia had changed the face of war, and now it is looking at new perspectives, and we are starting to feel them. I can go deeper into these signs, or you can lead the stream into a different direction if you want, Alexander. All right, I would like here, Alexey, that here, commenting on the options for this question that we asked at the beginning, perhaps you would have looked into the plan that Zelensky government exists, that they have. Listen, Alexander, they do not have a plan. They have a feeling, a world view that tells them it's better to die than to concede, than to acknowledge that they were wrong. That one of the other names for the sect is I'm always right. And if you strike truce, it means that you were wrong at some things, right? And the sect believes that they rather die and kill others than to acknowledge their mistakes. It stands on a huge hyper-narcissism. And this is one of the signs of belonging to that sect. Everybody is wrong, only us are right. And you can see that in their evening news streams, in the bloggers supporting Zelensky. You can see it in his behavior in Ukraine with his statements. You can see it even through his behavior in the Oval Office in Washington. And essential messages: you don't understand who Putin is, and we will show you how he needs to be handled. This is not about understanding or planning. This is about a mortal fear to find themselves in the hell of this sect. Their hell is to find themselves wrong. I acknowledge that. And so to avoid that, they will continue pressing that they're always right. The thing that cannot suffer is hyper-narcissism, that hyperinflated pride. And for that, they are ready to sign off 5, 10, or 20 more million into the grave. The main principle there is not the losses, not lives, but whether you remained right and did not somehow fall prey or acknowledge that Putin is stronger and can hold some parts of the country that they occupied. And listen, you can ask them, what's the plan? They say you cannot capitulate. And you're asking, do you have a plan? We have to continue fighting, their answer is. Meantime, nobody is coming to be drafted. They have to continue doing it by force. And okay, if we are to continue fighting, what are the positive goals of this fight? Their answer is because we cannot surrender. We cannot end it on this phase. Okay, yeah, Alexey, I'm with you. It looks legit. Yeah, Alexander. So your enemy suggests to give him 4 districts. If you will continue fighting, you likely will lose 6 total. You will actually destroy these 6 and a bunch of other economic installations in the other districts. And if you ask them now, why are you doing that? And why there'd be 100,000 more dead? Perhaps your relatives, yourself, your family. These people don't know what to answer. Their main message is, do not give in and do not sign anything with Russia and continue fighting. Alright, dear friends, don't forget to click the like button. This is rather important for us, wherever you're watching it, on Alexander Shelest channel, on Alexey Aristovich's channel, or here on Privateer Station. This is very important for us. If you click the like button, that helps with the YouTube and Rumble algorithms. Alright, Alexey. The statements do change, apparently, that long-range missiles will start hitting Russia. They're already counting Taurus missiles and kilometers. How far will they go? For those 150 Tauruses that Merz supposedly can deliver to Ukraine. What do you think they can solve in this war? Nothing, Alexander. Look, 150 Tauruses that Germany promised to provide, given that if you want to destroy a target, you need to launch a volley of 10, because part of them will be shot down by air defense systems, and if you really want to destroy the target, you need 10 missiles hitting it. So we're talking about 10 to 15 volleys, 10 to 15 targets. That entertainment could have been significant in April of 2022, even in perhaps November of 22, maybe even somewhat important in July of 23. Today, it's nothing. Information space today is overflowing with statements that Russia is already producing 500 UAVs a day and producing them faster than they can use it on the front. Even The Economist wrote recently that 1,000 UAVs per day is not an unachievable goal for Russia. And now look, 1,000 UAVs per day and 150 Tauruses for the whole time, or maybe for 3 months, half a year. These are incomparable. That's it? Perhaps that's it, but there is more here, Alexey. Is Germany ready to confront Russia militarily? And do you think there will be some actions following these Tauruses? Because it seems like Ukraine is bent on dragging Germany, France, with their president who was recently slapped in his face by Brigitte Macron, and drag everybody they can so that other countries would fight for Zelensky. And that statement from Zelensky's office actually fits pretty well in the strategic story that you described. Well, first of all, these big guys, even if they get face slapped, it's up to them to respond and choose how to. If they decide that they want to be dragged into this war, they will. If they somehow fall prey to Zelensky, well, then they have no pity. They're stop being the agent. And can they do it? Germany has nothing. France at least has some weapons. Britain has some fleet elements. But if Russia decides to realize their if-then answers, which they answered that if we will be hit by Tauruses, we will answer proportionally to the manufacturer of Tauruses. So if, for example, they get hit by Taurus missiles, they might drop a couple of ballistic missiles onto Germany. What will Germany do? Well, perhaps Fifth Article of NATO. Right, Fifth Article is only a consultation. They'll run to United States. Perhaps to France. I don't think they'll talk to Turkey. In this regard, they'll be talking for a long time. Macron will probably get face-slapped again, and then as the result, they likely will slap more sanctions on Russia, because there are no politicians on the West who are ready to oppose Russia militarily in this new format and new context. There are just none. If you have not found them by fourth year of this war, it's useless to expect that somehow you will find them later. They're playing simulation. They're feeding Ukraine with illusions, and the sect we have here is feeding itself off these illusions. Oh my God, Trump came out in the United States and said that Putin has gone mad. Everything will be different now, right? All the inspirations. Postovsky, a well-known Russian author, described that in his story, The Purple Light. And over there was a story of people who were so desperate for some outcome that they were grasping at straws, even if they were told that there is some supernatural purple light that will shine tomorrow and destroy all their enemies. And it takes me an effort to not fall back to expletives describing the current situation in Ukraine. Everything that's happening there is a huge tragedy. But it is so tragic that it's slowly turning into a dark comedy. As Stanislav Jezelets commented on other things, that if you go deeper into the problem, you're taking a risk of exiting it on the other side. And it reminds me what's happening in Ukraine, that drunk actors who have drunken everything, all the attributes of the theater, burnt the theater itself, and now they're gathering to perform something on the smoking ruin. So, to create a new background to understand the picture sharper, to understand the perspectives of this new phase of war, perhaps it makes sense to describe that new phase. Look, last year, invite that was still open till last week in Istanbul was relying on June ultimatum from Putin, stated back in 2024. 4 districts in Crimea. Russia did not care how they would get to those 4 districts. If they can achieve it diplomatically, they could. They did not have to fight, and they were looking forward to perhaps striking diplomatic deal. Yet that agreement failed. That proposal was on the table for a year. And then it was dismissed, ultimately by Ukrainian side. Then Putin makes new statements that now he is talking perhaps about Odessa and Nikolaev. He's already sending those warnings. For today, Odessa and Nikolaev are not voiced officially, but he reaffirmed those 4 districts and adding 2 more buffer zones, Sumy and Kursk. Their goals are to take Donetsk, Lugansk, and Zaporozhye district, entire Zaporozhye district, so that you understand. These are the goals of the summer-autumn campaign that Putin announced for this year, depending on how it goes. Most likely being realistic, and 3 years of war taught them to be closer to the facts. They understand that they probably will take Donetsk and Lugansk, and they will have to postpone Zaporozhye district till later. Next peace proposal we may expect from them in autumn, October, November, when they take Donetsk and Lugansk and create some buffer zones in Chernigov, Sumy, and the neighboring districts. And they would probably come out and say, fellas, we are suggesting that we come to agreement again. And peace agreement, again, will be reinforced. We can sign it only with somebody who follows Zelensky, not with him. They're stating that they can sign truce and ceasefire before the elections to allow Ukraine to conduct elections, and will sign the actual peace deal with the next president. Then more interesting commentaries surfaced from the Committee of Defense, that this war is for uniting Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus for creating a joint unified state. This is not Odessa and Nikolaev. This is a slightly different story. Alexey, can you unpack it? Because many public commentators and analysts, let's say, are very skeptical and somewhat in a very Ukrainian style, in the Zelensky style, have characterized the statements from Russia. And this is why I'm asking you to unpackage the story. When Kadakov, legal advisor to Putin, came out and said that, look, USSR fell apart in a wrong fashion. Look, Alexander, these are the statements from official people, but they're not the frontmen. And what they're doing, they're setting a new horizon. Frontmen would be Lavrov, for example, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said that if we are proceeding in that fashion, if you fail to agree to our proposals, we will be continuing our warfare with you. And you will eventually understand that our terms are what they are, and you cannot wiggle out. But they're concentrating on destroying the reasons for this war, anti-project of Ukraine as an anti-project for Russia. They want to change that projectivity of the country. But these new faces that come out, they're saying that, yes, change of projectivity plus going into the new bigger project together with Russia and Belarus. Official Russia is not stating that yet as the goals of their military campaign. However, when the member of the Defense Committee in their Congress or legal advisor to Putin is making the statement and nobody attacks them, it means that they're setting a new horizon. And it means that these goals will be on paper for us to consider if we do not get sober. There'll be 4 districts, then there'll be 6 districts in the proposal, and then probably instead of 8 districts, we'll see another proposal that Russia wants to create a unified country, perhaps not with the whole Ukraine, but with whatever they annex militarily. And they already have those 4 districts added to their constitution, so they would not have any alternative governance. This is the next goal, a big one, even if they will continue going in an orderly fashion. They are already setting remote goals, because they are connecting the reasons for this war with the existence of independent Ukraine as a country. And they're saying that the core reasons for this war are in existence of Ukraine as an independent state. It needs to disappear or remain independent, but as a friendly state, perhaps as a friendly state within some para-organization with Belarus and Russia. And this is the far horizon that they're describing. Their actions on the international arena are already following with that suit. And you can achieve this goal militarily, diplomatically, or in any combination of approaches. Now let's look at all things aerial on the front. Except for what's happening actually on the front line, there are things related to that's happening in the manufacturing capabilities. Last night there were 300 to 400 UAVs attacking Ukraine. And there are open statements that soon there'll be 500 or 600. That implies that our air defense systems will be failing to contain that. Well, they're already failing, right? Right. Plus, Russia will be adding AI elements to it, where the lead UAV will be conducting the flock of following UAVs and attacking one target together. What does it mean? It means that our air defense systems are trying to intercept UAVs, wasting precious missiles on these smaller targets instead of ballistic missiles or more important and more devastating methods of attack. It means that also Europe will not be able to provide us enough missiles to keep shooting down these Russian aerial attacks. And this is a dead-end path because a missile costs much more than a UAV. you first need to organize an air defense system that can shoot down up to 1,000 targets a day. Air defense systems are super expensive, long to train, and single produced specialists are produced individually. You just don't have enough specialists to do that. And it's going to be more and more difficult to shoot down these UAVs if they start equipping it with AI. So Ukraine is now looking at the abyss. We were proud that we could be making some of the UAVs in our garages, but frankly, none of the smaller producers can compete with Russian government machine. And the well-known statement states that order always beats class. And Russia figured a way to produce way more UAVs, and they're opening more and more factories producing them. And that downpour of the attacks, of the means of attack, of aerial attack that will continue on our heads, will very quickly demoralize Ukraine in deeper areas away from the front. Faster doesn't mean in 2 days or 2 weeks, but if they continue attacks for the next 6 months, the rest of Ukraine will be facing a very significant psychological hurdle. We are not exactly familiar with dislocation of military training centers, manufacturing centers in Ukraine. Right, Russians probably don't have clear targets too, but recently, if you noticed, Ukrainian dipwits figured out that, we will be turning off the cellular phones connections for 8 to 12 hours. That's one of the dumbest decisions, because outside of giving a chance for somebody to guide UAVs, it also is heavily relied upon by manufacturers, by people in Ukraine to communicate with each other. Military orders are sent very often with via cell phones, so they have not really thought through this order or this idea. And it appears more and more that Zelensky government is some sort of shamanism trying to concoct their victory out of weird motions. Right, Zelensky is sort of a top shaman sitting at the smoking fire, right, talking to ghosts and spirits. All these developments in aerial warfare indicate that Ukrainian safety away from the front is evaporating, because safe territory away from the front and the territory that is getting attacked nightly are two very different things. If there'll be sirens screaming nightly and there'll be hundreds of military vehicles falling on your heads that you cannot do anything about, I predict that by November the country will be quite ready to negotiate. Now, again, when everybody falls into this mood eventually, into the despair, what would be the next move of the sect? We already defined they cannot establish a more effective military manufacturing complex. I think I know, Alexey. Hold the thought for a sec. I think I know what you're going to say, but... So, look, they cannot resist militarily, effectively, long-term, to Russian Federation. People were laughing initially that Russia was trying to produce something and it was not flying or not exploding. Well, 3 years deeper, they figured out how to make relatively working UAVs, and I suspect they will continue that growth. And by November, there might be a next evolution of this phase, more UAVs, more ballistic missiles, and perhaps very depleted UAVs in Ukraine, that anti-UAV missiles in Ukraine that can only target select few. And we've been comparing before two different kinds of UAVs, right? There are different UAVs. There are UAVs that fly to destroy some civilian target, and then there are also battlefront UAVs. And Russia is already exceeding Ukraine in manufacturing these battlefront UAVs, which are heavier armored and can destroy better. And if this trend continues, they interact with China, they gathered enough resources to build more factories. If that trend continues, in 6 months, we will be losing the air over the front line as well. We are already losing it, or on the verge. And this will be leading us in the logic of the funnel of catastrophes. It'll be phase 3 or 4 from where you usually cannot get out. What could a system do if it was a proper government? It could have said, fellows, everything for the front, everything for the victory, we are in danger, we can really resist with our blood, sweat and tears, everybody go, manufacture these things, we're establishing more factories, we're producing UAVs en masse. Can you imagine that happening in Ukraine? Can you imagine Zelensky's sect doing it? Of course not. They failed to get smarter for the last 2.5 years, and they're not going to get smarter anytime soon. So their perspective basically now changes to one speech, one faith, one district, because we have one brain cell. Oh, that's a good slogan, Alexey. Right, before that qualitative jump to the next phase, Russia will likely suggest another negotiation, and with different terms. Perhaps we'll be asking for 6 districts and new conditions. What do you think the sect will answer? They will exacerbate tragedy, Alexei. Right. They have disrupted the Istanbul, they will disrupt another Istanbul, and they will allow Russia to terrorize the rest of Ukraine. And if their UAVs hit anything like chemical factory or nuclear plant, then Ukraine will probably begging for more sanctions against Russia. And that's all strategy they have. Alexei, what I wanted to bring here, at the end of last week, the dogs started barking at the caravan. Everybody started attacking Arestovych, who made a post that the fundraising for military and non-military purposes, but we're gathering another fundraiser that you had was for things that are not killing, for humanitarian transports, evacuation things, and there was a whole machine trying to attack you, Arestovich is a traitor, etc., etc. Do you understand that the problem of this pool of people who've been peddling this topic, and I apologize, I will give myself to perhaps a little boldly, but to summarize that you've been analyzing everything from the position of a person who cares about Ukraine. And just like now you're asking, what will the sect do? The sect will likely create a tragedy to be able to show it in the world media, to show some bloodbath after explosion of some factory or some other tragedy that happens, which they tried to do before, but with Kakhovsky, I guess, that did not cause too wide of a splash in the world media. They can blow up perhaps Kievan Dam, and one bank of the city will be underwater. That will be horrible, and the sect would be hoping that the world will finally wake up, will say no more victims, and will somehow come to agreement. So that could have been an interesting Hollywood blockbuster story, I think, with Bruce Willis, who is lighting up the last match or shooting in that jet or UAV flying over the target. Is that the scenario that the sect is trying to peddle, and that's why sect will try to answer with tragedy to Russian advancements? Look, Alexander, this goes into 2 things. First is the reaction of the world. In reality, there were a million reasons for the world to intervene. The war itself is a huge reason. Then there were Kherson prisons, there were tragedies in Bucha, attacks on civilian targets, and what? And nothing. Hyper-narcissism of Zelensky sect is that they think that the world has not seen tragedies as what is happening in Ukraine. And second, that the world owes it to Ukraine, and they need to react to every hair that falls from Ukrainian child's head. The world actually saw a lot of tragedies, like what's happening in Ukraine. And moreover, some countries in this world are the authors of a lot bigger tragedies than what's happening. They're trying to appeal to whom? To American senators who, back in the day, were fighting in Vietnam themselves? When chemical weapons were used, when Agent Orange was used, when probably about 2 million civilians were dead as the result of military operations. And then there was Afghanistan, Iraq. many other incidents, that I don't think will fly. That expectation doesn't have legs for Ukraine. And of course, Trump comes out and says that Putin is mad, has gone mad, and it's all sad. But he's not, if you notice, he's not talking about giving more arms to Ukraine for a simple reason, that Russia, for him, is a factor and a serious and very responsible ally. For one simple reason, Russia is ready for a nuclear war to defend its interests, and Trump is not ready to start a third world war with nukes. And that's why Russia has a weight on the global arena. Now, what is Ukraine for Trump? It's a toxic passive asset. You can be talking about things and peace and all deals for years. We've been talking for 3 years already. But unless the productivity of Ukraine changes, the toxic asset will not become a non-toxic asset. Now, if Ukraine went to bed today and woke up tomorrow in a country similar to Israel, with good high-tech, with very good connections with the United States, being ally number one, look how Americans treat Israel. They're not really treating them well, right? Trump was quite brutal to Netanyahu. He demanded the stoppage of operation. Trump is ready to acknowledge Palestinian state and almost slapping sanctions on Israel. And that with a very deep codependency of Israel and the United States that we can only dream about. So if he exerts so much pressure on Israel, you can only imagine how much pressure would be on Ukraine. Well, that's part of a riddle, Alexei. I'm quite curious why not so much pressure is exerted on Ukraine. We've been talking here that, and with my other guest, I was saying that some expectations were that Trump will force Ukraine to the table, that Ukraine will start negotiating, that new ambassador will figure a deal, and everything will be good, and Ukrainian oligarchs will be losing their stolen monies, and Ukraine will get new deals and new future. Well, Alexander, Trump does not need Ukraine. Trump was hoping to offer a good deal that Russia and Ukraine will sign off on voluntarily. Russia said, yes, sure, why not? Here's a $1 trillion fund, here's the trust fund. We don't care how we get to the goals. That looks like a way to get there. Give us 4 districts, and after that we can conduct any deal. Plus neutrality of the country, plus Russian language, church, etc. Everything that Lavrov had stated. And Zelensky came out and said, no, we don't need that. We need to continue the war. And you, Trump, need to start participating in it. Trump went to think of it and came back and said, well, you know, whatever Zelensky says really obstructs everything that we're trying to do here. And even if the left bank of Kiev will be completely washed off with the Kievan dam waters, the world may be upset for a week. It will not do much. They perhaps will add a couple more sanctions against Russia, but that's it. That's one of the limits. And the other limit is that there is really nothing to fight Russia with. And they're not going to Ukraine to fight for Ukraine against Russia. That fairy tale where one country is a probable, not simple, but a probable ally in a complex world, and the other country is a toxic asset that is hanging on your neck, it's usually being resolved in one fashion, time and time again, by leaving from Vietnam or Afghanistan. In our lives, I was born in 1975, America has left Vietnam, America has left Afghanistan and Iraq. Yes, with civilians falling off the planes that were taking off the runway. Yes, abandoning several 100,000 peoples who were working with American administrations while they were there. Basically abandoning them all. Their destinies are tragic and horrible. Those are the parents who are giving their children to soldiers leaving the country, considering themselves already dead, just to try to give future for their child in the United States. And a well-known saying is coming to mind. It's dangerous to be the enemy of the United States, but it's much more dangerous to be its friend. And that's the story. Then 50 nuclear bombs, Russian bombs exploding over Ukraine will not change anything. Nobody will fight for us. Except for Russia and Belarus, nobody will fight for Ukraine. There are only 2 countries who are eager to fight for Ukrainian territory, in both positive and negative versions. In positive, when we somehow unite together,
In the negative, they're fighting with Ukraine as they think against the other Ukraine. And it's only Russia and Belarus, nobody else. That's the reality we live in. Smart people will be basing their politics on this reality. But since we do not have a government with smart people, we have a religious sect. They cannot make smart decisions, they can only simulate rationality. But in their worldview, they are illogical to normal logic, but they're logical within their own goal sets. And they do not have any serious answer to the problems we're posting. And those who are still trying to think in Ukraine, just analyze what can they do. And that's why I think it will not be a tragedy, it will be a protracted tragedy. The more UAVs will be falling on the heads of Ukrainians, the higher the degree of patriotism screams will be. They'll be probably falling into some fascist rhetorics and fascist practices on the nation. And I think as, Hess or who else has said that when the government starts to burn books, they will end up burning people. And we've already seen some books being burnt in some districts. I predict a very serious threat to mobilizing women somewhere in autumn. They're already dropping down the age of men who are going to front. They will need to drop it down to 18, and Central Drafting Committee will need to become more active. So the country is a hostage of the sect, and the sect is dragging it into a grave. There's no single rational explanation that they can provide why do not they stop. They are repeating as a mantra that Russia will not stop. Okay, let's play this out. Russia does not stop. Russia will not stop fighting against sect. Sure, but whom can they stop fighting against? Why Russia is not fighting with Kazakhstan? Why they're not fighting with Azerbaijan? Azerbaijan is not a complementary state to Russia. They just destroyed their ally Armenia. And yet Russia is not at war with Azerbaijan. Apparently there are conditions that allow Russia to not fight. We are not Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, obviously. They look at us differently, but even on these terms, we could have done something to stop this war. There are ways to do that. They actually are naming certain things, that they're ready to stop military action on these conditions, 1, 2, and 3. But the conditions keep deteriorating for us because the sect continues to insist on fighting. There are no perspectives, though. There are no conditions under which Ukraine can prevail in this war. International support will never change because we are alien for them. Let's just face it. They're not ready to fight with a nuclear country, especially with Russia, for Ukraine. Nobody. Nobody will. 150 Tauruses that we're getting, that's a great story. Well, we haven't gotten them yet, right, but they're promising. Right, that's a great story, but this is a drop. This is not enough. And Europe cannot provide a stream of support that can allow Ukraine to equally resist military industry of Russian Federation. Europe and the United States just cannot. Even the United States cannot do it now. And even united, they likely will not be able to resist Russia at this point because they've missed certain milestones. Plus, there are no guarantees that China will not start aiding Russia if the situation will change on the front. Therefore, any continuation of this war is just exacerbation of the number of victims and the conditions of a very rational situation where nothing can be changed with these actions. And the sect has no perspectives. It is incapable militarily, it is incapable administratively, it is incapable diplomatically. And one more element here is that not only the world will not react to Ukraine the way the sect wants it to. Answer me the question, what is the reason for existence, raison d'etre for this anti-project? This is a good question. It's not getting easier for civilians, right, under this regime. Our economy is not getting better. Life is not getting better. The latest law, they adopted that every time you sell a couch, you need to declare that as an income. Congrats, you're all entrepreneurs. You wanted to be entrepreneurs, now you are entrepreneurs. And you have to report for 200 hryvnias to the tax commission. What are we fighting for? For Ukrainian culture and language?
I can remind you an episode here from the Soviet Union times that they had a Ukrainian language and culture quite flourishing. The number of books in Ukrainian, nobody published as much as Soviet Union did. Independent Ukraine didn't publish even 1/100th of what Soviet Union did in Ukrainian. The best encyclopedia of Ukrainian language was published under Soviet Union times. And a trilateral state does not threat this Ukraine, right? In Moscow, we have Taras Shevchenko and Lesya Ukrainka and Square Van Franco that are next to Kievan rail station. So Ukrainian culture and language will definitely remain in that whatever trilateral state that Russia is putting on the horizon, on the agenda. Nothing will happen to the culture. They may be calling it a small Russian or something else, but it will be Ukrainian. Then what we're fighting for. And I want to remind that old Ukrainian insurgency leaders were telling me that Khrushchev, the leader of Soviet Union, when they were agreeing, looking for ways to stop fighting with insurgency army in Ukraine, they actually came to a temporary truce, took some of the leaders, brought them to Kiev, leaders of insurgency army, and showed them very expensive publications of Ukrainian authors, Taras Shevchenko, gilded edition, thesauruses in Ukrainian, girls in Ukrainian national dresses in Kiev, Ukrainian language all around them. And they were asked the question, what are you fighting for? And the leaders of insurgency movement, they gave up. They abandoned their fight. Because the tragedy here is not in that nobody helps Ukraine because the dam, for example, will be washed and 300,000 more people will die. The tragedy of anti-project is that its existence is pointless. Utterly pointless. They're saying they're fighting for Ukrainian identity and language and culture. Ukrainian identity, language, and culture, even if Russia completely annexes the country, will continue to exist. They will not disappear. Why does the culture have to exist on a certain territory, under a certain regime? That sect has no answers to it. Well, also, Alexei, let's look at Europe. Merz surprised us with the Taurus gift, but also mentioned that if Slovaks and Hungarians will continue to wobble and take a different position from the main course of European Union, we will defund some of your projects, right? So basically, if you will not be supporting our politics, we will turn off the gas. Oh, great, Alexander. So the old story of Europe is that the countries will start fighting with each other, right? Old members fighting new members. And frankly, there are a lot of contradictions between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. For example, the destiny of Yugoslavia is still smoldering. But the central question of the story, what are the positive goals of anti-project in Ukraine? Listen, if the only thing they state is preserving national culture, they don't need state for that. Culture can exist without the state. A simple example, the only dependency is that the nation dispersed would want to continue to identify as Ukrainian, to learn the language, to use Ukrainian dresses, listen to certain music and read certain books if they want to. For that, the culture needs to appeal to very high meanings. That when a person meets, for example, American culture, German culture, French culture, Australian culture, they need to, wherever else Ukrainians are in the world, they need to say that, look, kids, you are now in Italian culture. 70% of cultural treasures are in Italy, of the world cultural treasures. But that culture, and let's call it culture X or culture U, needs to be so strong that the kids would want to be part of it. You cannot force Ukraine on people. Even if you force it on your children, they will drop it off by the time they turn 18 or 25 and might end up being opponents and will be pushing back on the Ukrainian culture. Just like kids in Kiev today are listening to Russian rap and watching Russian TV series to protest the sect politicians and their orders. But if there is something of meaning, like heavenly comedy, Faust, or something else written in Ukrainian that they're so great that kids would say, you know what, I want to read it in the original language, in Ukrainian. So, Alexey, Korchinsky actually mentioned recently you and some of the cultural aspects in his speech somewhere, that he was saying that we do not want regurgitated Russian. We want to read things in the original. And that position of Arestovych, as he said, he is saying, he's comparing you with the old toy that is pointless now, that he needs to go to a different light and different story. Well, you know what, Alexander, ask Korchinsky how many foreign languages does he know? And what language does he use to read Faust? I assure you he is reading it in Russian, because I have worked with him for 10 years, and I know what he can read and what he cannot read. Second, he probably cannot order an ice cream in English. I'm not even talking about German or Spanish. So he's reading things in that regurgitated Russian that he is saying. Second, is Goethe Ukrainian? Is Dante Alighieri written in Ukrainian? Well, you need to dig deeper, right? Maybe Jesus Christ is Ukrainian. You know, that old anecdote, right? Hermann Hesse, is he also Ukrainian? They're all screaming about European culture as if they were creating it. They need to show a true Ukrainian pearls, a true Ukrainian cultures. They don't need to bring Poles and Germans and others. I value those cultures. They have a lot to give. By the way, I did study in an institute, in the Catholic Institute of Religious Studies, and my acquaintance with the Western literature and culture is a bit deeper than Korchinsky can imagine. But yet I do not present pearls made in one culture for pearls of another culture. Meantime, some of the politicizing sect members, they're saying that we do not need to watch The Mystery of a Third Planet or The Guest from the Future that were shot in Russian and Soviet times. There are great TV series and movies produced in the West. This is the wrong approach. Where are you and where is West? Show your own kids cartoons, TV series. You don't have any? What were you doing for 34 years? You do not want to read regurgitated Hegel? I'm quite sure Korchinsky read the Phenomenology of a Spirit in Russian. Because in German he only knows Hände hoch. And even that from the Soviet movies about Second World War. Right, and probably Ja, ja, natürlich. And the second part is limits and limitations. Korchinsky is not needed in the West. To the descendants of Dante and others, they don't need that. They don't need Korchinsky as the cultural figure. They want him as the native dressed in a blanket that he got for fighting their neighbors. And that's the tragedy. That they're forgetting that the ancestors of the other cultures do not really need Ukrainians in any format. And that's where we can quote Taras Bulba. He's not Korchinsky, of course, but he's got some authority, right? His author has. So that literary figure is saying that you, and he is talking about Ukrainians, that you prefer the boot of the Polish landowner that is pressing your neck to your own identity on your own lands. And this is about Korchinsky's message, basically. And whoever is supporting him, literally. This is funny if you know and understand these elements. And he's not a dumb person, but that religious sect that is driving our country apparently is desensitizing the brains even of the smarter ones. Look, just understand the situation once again. These people are screaming, we do not need Bobby because Pete is giving us better, more cultural jewels. And Pete says, I don't need you.
get lost. I'd rather talk to Bobby, because Bobby has some stuff, some cultural achievements of his own. And yeah, Vasya has, for example, Bobby has Stravinsky, Tchaikovsky, Repin, Tolstoy, Gogol, Malevich, Shostakovich. What do you have? Korchinsky and his comrades are known in the West only for one thing, that they're fighting against Bulgakov. In just Germany, the number of doctorate works dedicated to Bulgakov are over 200. End of the first hour.